Hi, I'm Pei-Chia Lan. I grew up in Taiwan and went to the US for my PhD study. I got my degree from Northwestern in 2000 and did 1 year postdoc at UC Berkeley. After that, I returned to Taiwan and have been teaching at National Taiwan University for almost 20 years. I'm now a distinguished professor and also the founding director of Global Asia Research Center. My research explores how international migration and globalization shapes intersecting social inequalities in everyday life, including gender, race, ethnicity, and social class. My first book, Global Cinderellas, Migrant Domestics and Newly Rich Employers in Taiwan. It was published in 2006 by Duke University Press. It grew out my dissertation and won a Distinguished Book Award from the Sex and Gender section of the American Sociological Association. It is an ethnographic study about Filipino and Indonesian migrant domestic workers in Taiwan. I also conducted in-depth interview with Taiwanese employers. So by weaving data from both sides, the book analyzes the negotiation of social boundaries in such transnational encounter. My second English book is Raising Global Families, Parenting, Immigration, and Class in Taiwan and the US. It is published by Stanford University Press in 2018. It is a multi-site study. I interviewed 4 groups of ethnic Chinese parents in Taiwan and the US. Middle class and working class Taiwanese and middle class and working class Chinese immigrants in Boston areas. Although these parents share a similar ethnic culture background, these parents developed class-specific and context-sensitive strategies of child rearing to cope with uncertainty and insecurity in the changing society and the globalized world. However, their security strategies often lead to unintended consequences and paradoxically magnify anxiety among families. I decided to study sociology because I wanted to change the world. Although later on I realized it is actually very difficult. So during my college years, I was involved in student movement. I spent more time on the street protesting or studying groups, reading books about feminism and Marxism. So that is why I got interested in the gender issues and also the labor issues. My interest in migration and race and ethnicity only happened after I moved to the US, becoming a migrant and a foreign student myself. At the same time, I also noticed that the situation in Taiwan has been changing very rapidly. Starting from the early 1990s, we are recruiting more and more migrant workers and also marriage migrants from Southeast Asia and also mainland China. And also I noticed that when my generation of Taiwanese become parents, the way we raise children are very different from the previous generation. Globalization and internationalization has a great impact on how people raise their children and make decisions about their children's education. The first challenge I face shifting from the status of graduate student to a full-time faculty is time shortage. So when you are a graduate student, you have a big chunk of time focusing on your writing. But when you become a faculty member, you have to multitask. And it is very difficult to balance research and teaching. So how did I cope with these problems? I simply work longer and longer. I work in almost every weekend. And that's actually a bad idea. Now I realize you need to have more effective time management. For example, you need to find your most productive hours, and you need to keep some time to yourself, and you have to manage to find a quiet corner without interruption. And also you need to control the use of social media. The second challenge I face after returning to Taiwan is I have to face expectation both sides. One, I have to meet expectation locally, but also I wanted to maintain connection with the international community, which is challenging and also time consuming. But I think it is very important. You have to make efforts to maintain international connection. How do you do it? For example, you still have to attend international conferences regularly. Personally, I find small workshops more productive. Nowadays, it's probably easier because we have the social media and also internet. With the COVID-19, people are doing a lot of webinar, so it is actually easier nowadays. Well, you have to start publishing as early as you can. So during graduate school, I published my master thesis, which is something I think you should all try. Um, Actually, the market is getting more and more competitive. So before graduating, getting your PhD, you should definitely start submitting article, preferably from your dissertation research. The advice I like to offer is about how to turn your dissertation into a book. So you have to remember, you are not revising your dissertation. You are writing a book. What does that mean? Well, you have to think about what kind of readers you are speaking to. When you are writing your dissertation, you are trying to please your advisor and please your committee member. But right now, you are writing to a broader readership. They could be students, they could be your colleagues, they could be interdisciplinary readers. So you have to make your writing accessible to them. And the second advice I like to offer is you have to speak in your own voice. Do not be shy about the contribution or your unique idea and points. Make them open and public in the world. That's why you need to write this book. Many of you are probably writing about your own society, a local case that's not always marketable to the Western audience. I remember when I was looking for a publisher to publish my first book, I approached many publishers, and one of them responded to my request very honestly. He said, "This is a book about Taiwan. I cannot publish a book about Taiwan. It won't sell in the US." So that's probably a challenge many of you are facing. So you have to find the unique contribution and the significance you can sell about the local case. You have to find the general and theoretical significance of your local case. I think it's extremely important to publish both internationally and locally because they are speaking to very different readers. In my own experience, I published 2 English books and also 2 Chinese books. And I think they speak to very different readers. When I publish in English, I do not spend too much time talking about empirical details of the Taiwan's case. Instead, I highlight the theoretical implication of the case and also try to adapt comparative perspective to emphasize why it is important for the Western reader to learn from Taiwan's case. But when I was writing the Chinese book, I know it will have a broader impact by including both academic and lay readers. And in the book, I can also have more space for empirical nuance of the Taiwan's case. Of course, if you have to write bilingually, it is time consuming. But in my own experience, I think you can actually gain insights from shifting perspective and context. Some of you are probably familiar with feminist standpoint theories. The theory told us that those on the margins may gain more capacity to understand how power system operates. For example, women compared to men will have better understanding about how patriarchy works. Slaves compared to master would understand better about slavery. So that being said, us in the margin of the academic world actually occupies a privileged position to challenge the doxa in the world of Bourdieu. So your marginal status could actually be a plus rather than a minus in the academic production of knowledge. But how can you do it? The standpoint does not happen automatically. We need to be constantly reflexive about who we are and where we stand. Methodologically, I would advise that always keep a comparative perspective about your own case and the other cases. When I talk about comparative research, I do not mean that you actually have to, conduct a multi-nation, multi-society comparison. In fact, every research is comparative in nature. So I'd like to take the time to introduce our center, Global Asia Research Center. Our center trying to situate Taiwan study in comparison with other Asian countries. In addition to comparative research, we also promote transnational research. Asian scholar has reminded us that not to fall into the trap of methodological nationalism. That is, we tend to take nation state as a given unit of analysis. But in my research, for example, in my second book, I emphasize that we need to situate parenting strategy and practice in a global context. We need to examine transnational connection and also international comparison, how those contexts shape how parents raise their children, even locally. So looking back, there are two things I wish I have done differently. First, I wish I did not go to graduate school right after college. Um, the reason is that I wish I could have accumulated other kind of working experiences before going to the academic study. And the second thing is I wish I could have stayed in the States working a few more years before coming back to Taiwan. Let me say that I'm very happy about my decision returning to Taiwan, personally and professionally, because working in Taiwan gave me more opportunity to engage in public sociology, and also I think I have more capacity to use teaching as an opportunity of social activism. But I do hope that I could have stayed in the US for a few more years so I can learn the experience of working and teaching there. And I can also build international connection and network more solidly before returning to Taiwan. I think we need more public sociology in today's world. Increasingly, I have become less and less patient with academic writing that use a lot of fancy words and opaque sentences. I feel that a lot of journal articles in particulars are talking to the choir instead of reaching to a broader public. I think we need to do more public sociology and we need to deliver the points rather than showcase how smart you are. I want to talk about my experience of publishing the Chinese book. So for example, in my experience, when I published the English version of Global Cinderella, the book sold about 2,000 copies, which is considered pretty good by the standard of academic publication. But the Chinese version of Global Cinderella, it sold over 10,000 copies just in Taiwan. My second book, the second Chinese book, which also sold over 7,000 books within only 1.5 years. So I think this Chinese book, really reach a broader public, and it also has a greater social impact outside of academia. For example, I ran into a flight attendant. She told me after reading Global Cinderella, she felt differently with the migrant worker she regularly meets at work, and also met judges, social workers, and teachers who told me that after reading my book on parenting, they got a better understanding about those marginalized families they serve at work. I think we need to look at research as an act of translation and communications. I use the metaphor of translation to emphasize that we write to bridge different social groups in terms of their life experiences, their values, and also their worldviews. And we use writing to communicate with different kind of readers. But how to do that? I think it's very important to remember that we need to use more story and narratives so we can engage readers to build understanding and empathies across different social groups. But by doing that, I want to emphasize that theories and concepts still matter a lot. They offer perspective for reader to break from what they have taken for granted, and also help them to put their own experiences in a broader context to understand better, especially how the structural forces shape their experience. So there are two advices I'd like to offer to you. The first regards research. First of all, I think you need to find something that really interests you, that really puzzles you, that you feel passionate about you, because you are going to stay with this topic for a long time. Whatever you study, you need to find innovative research angles. How to do it? You can probably cross or merge different subfields. You can try to relocate the scale of analysis. For example, in my experience, from the local to the transnational analysis. And also finally, like I said earlier, I think it's always fruitful to adopt a comparative perspective so you can dig out the theoretical meaning of your local case. The second advice I'd like to offer regards teaching. Of course, teaching takes time away from research, but I think we need to take teaching seriously. First of all, it is good balance with research. When you cannot produce your writing, at least you have teaching to go back to. And moreover, I think teaching can help you to sharpen your ability to communicate with the public. And teaching is a means of activism. My colleague Zeng Yunfen has described teaching as an endeavor of intergenerational care, 跨世代的照顾. I really like the description. I think this description moves away from the model of professor as authority figure or teaching simply as a linear process of delivering knowledge. Instead, this view recognizes teaching as not just cognitive work, but also emotional and embodied work. Teaching is actually a process of mutual learning and challenge, constant dialogue and reflection. I hope that we sociologists could serve as translators who bridge social divides with solid research, and also carers who engage the younger generation through creative teaching. So good luck in your journey of sociology. I wish the best for you. Bye-bye.